Welcome to Elmcast. This is officially our first podcast on our Indigenous-led podcast here. And today I'm joined in with a special guest, Wab Kinew. Hello.
Hello.
How are you feeling today?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And beside me I have Havana.
Hi.
How are you feeling, Havana?
I'm doing pretty good today.
Okay, good. So we're just going to ask you a few questions here, Wab. And
For sure.
don't hold back. Feel free. Be honest. It's open space.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll do my best.
So I have a few guiding questions here just to start us off. My first one would be, what does being Indigenous mean to you?
Well, I am an Anishinaabe person.
Okay.
And when I was growing up in the Ojibways of Inigaming First Nation, basically we're very fun-loving, hardworking, celebratory people, dance powwow, practice the traditional way of life, speak the language, the Anishinaabe language. And so now that, I'm a parent and living in Winnipeg, I just try to keep those positive aspects of our identity going and try to speak the language to my kids, try to share the culture with them while not forcing it on them in terms of powwow and Sundance ceremonies. And I just use the traditional way of life as a source of motivation and a grounding principle in my life, so that if things get a little too far in one direction or the other, I always just try to bring it back to the basics of what being Anishinaabe is all about.
Okay, it's very positive. I love it. Havana, I'm going to ask you the same question.
Okay.
So what does being Indigenous mean to you?
Being Indigenous means to me, growing up, I've been very heavily involved in my culture, which I am so thankful for, and not many people have that opportunity. And to me, I'd love to carry that on and teach people around me. Very proud of it.
Okay.
That's great.
So my next guiding question would be, what does reconciliation mean to you, Wab?
I always just break down the word reconciliation itself. And
Okay.
basically, you have two parts of the word. You have the right? Like you're doing it again.
Yep.
And then conciliation, which is basically like bringing two people together. And the reason why I think that the word is relevant in Canada today is because if you go back a few hundred years ago, Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, when they first came together, it was actually a pretty positive relationship, like in terms of the trade that was happening. And when most non-Indigenous people came here 200 or 300 years ago, they actually had to learn Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe language. So that was like the trade language of the day. But then obviously over the ensuing few hundred years, things went off the rails in terms of broken treaties, the Indian Act, residential schools, and a bunch of other challenges. So to me, reconciliation means that coming together that happened in the past and then the breaking apart during the more traumatic parts of our history means that today we're in this era of trying to bring things back together again, trying to repair what happened. And so really it's an opportunity, I think, for us as Canadians to think about what we want for the future of our country and how we can show respect for Indigenous peoples and culture like Anishinaabe people, while also making sure that everyone in Canada is able to reach their full potential.
Okay, so building off of that, how do you support TRC?
Well, the TRC was actually a super important process in my life. You know, I had the opportunity to participate in many of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings when they were going on. First, as a news reporter, I was working for CBC Television when the TRC was launched in 2010. And actually, when the apology was made in 2008 as well. I was a journalist at that time too. And then over the ensuing years, even though I left journalism, I was invited back to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I had the opportunity to hear the stories of many survivors of residential schools, including my late father. And that was very meaningful to hear the stories of people across like Northern Ontario, Ottawa, Alberta, Manitoba, all over Canada, really. And I've always carried those stories with me. And I think the penultimate moment, like the sort of like the height of that experience was at the Alberta national event for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The commissioners and residential school survivors asked me to be an honorary witness, which is to just basically commit to sharing the stories of the TRC and of residential school survivors. And so that's something that I've always taken really seriously, whether it's through writing books or stuff that I do in politics today is to just try and honor that and really make the contribution to reconciliation that you're asking about. From my perspective, is to just try and remind people of where this thing started, which is with residential school survivors, telling their stories, asking for justice, but also charting forward a healing path for Canada as a whole.
So you were going to be running for Premier of Manitoba, is that right?
Yeah, there'll be an election this year, and so that's the goal.
So how do you feel about that?
Pretty excited. We've got a very good chance, but a lot of work left to do.
Okay. What would it mean to have a TRC knowledge keeper also be the Premier of the province?
Well, I would hope that that helps everyone in Manitoba, because I think that what I took out of hearing the stories of residential school survivors was the emotional impact and the impact on families. And in particular, what it was like for little kids to grow up without their families, and also what it was like for families to lose the children that they wanted to raise. So I think Manitoba as a whole, we're still dealing with a lot of the legacy of those things, whether it's on the social side or the healthcare side. A lot of the issues that we see around healthcare and mental health for some people are connected to this legacy. And so if we can better respond and have more compassion and more understanding in terms of our public response to those things, then I think that that helps everyone in Manitoba. And then when we're broadening it out, whether or not you have an experience with residential schools in your family or not, I do think that everyone is better off if we learn about this aspect of our history so that we can improve and try to avoid making similar mistakes in the future for Manitoba and for Canada. And so I think hopefully if our team is lucky enough to get elected to serve the people of Manitoba, then we would be able to just make that contribution of helping to increase everyone's understanding and compassion so that Manitoba as a whole can benefit for the years to come.
So if you were elected, how do you feel you could further support Indigenous youth in our community today as well as TRC?
Well, I think that, healthcare is such a huge issue, and I would include mental health under that as well, and issues around addictions and trauma. And I would just hope that we can bring a healing mindset to the province and to the country. The reason why I think that that's relevant is because, unfortunately, to this day, Indigenous youth often face more barriers on the way to trying to live a positive life or a successful life. And if we can just have an attitude that's focused around healing for the individual, but also healing for the society, and have that guide our approach to the healthcare system, the mental health system, then I think that that's really going to help people in the future. And when we talk about that phrase that everybody uses in relation to reconciliation now, every child matters. To me, what every child matters means is making sure that every child in our province can reach their full potential. And so first off, you need to be healthy. You need to be able to feel good and live a good life. And then I think that's where we get into education, is to make sure that that young person who does have a good life is now able to learn about the world and to reach their full potential and be able to succeed in their life. And to me, education is the most important thing that we can do to help young people from that perspective. So I think that those would be some of the really important things that we try to accomplish, both for Indigenous youth, but also for youth from any background, because I think the same challenge is true whether you're Indigenous or not. You want to be healthy, you want to have a strong mind, you want to be able to do something positive with your life.
So when we talk about the education and healthcare and stuff like that, a lot of Indigenous youth on reserve don't have that sort of access. So what do you see as the primary barrier for Indigenous youth growing up today?
I think that having access to healthcare and access to education means having access to opportunity. And I think that we have to listen to what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission told us, which is that if we help to fix these things and we live up to that phrase, every child matters, then all of us are going to be better off. For sure, the child who's able to reach their full potential is going to have a better life. They're going to be able to achieve more, and then they're going to be able to give back and contribute more to our society. But also everybody's better off. Everybody's better off in a Manitoba where young people, let's say, just use one example, the child welfare system, where young people from the child welfare system are able to be put on a pathway to post-secondary and college and university instead of a pathway to some of the challenges of what we see on the streets today. And so I think that would benefit that young person, but then it would also benefit our whole province if all of a sudden we have a trajectory or a path for somebody like that to be put onto a positive step for their future rather than what we see today, which is too many people suffering and too many people being left behind. So I really just think in all these different areas where there's very, very complex decisions and choices that need to be made, whether it's healthcare, education, all the various aspects of the provincial government, I do think that that phrase, every child matters, is a very good reminder for us to try and use to go forward.
So going off that topic, thinking back to when you were a youth, do you see any changes in the community that affect our youth positively? Because there are many negative setbacks.
I actually see a lot that has changed since I was a kid. And I think that first and foremost, awareness has definitely increased. And I do think it was that journey of the residential school survivors telling their stories, participating in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and then the TRC report, creating more awareness, and then the calls to justice of the missing and murdered Indigenous women Two-Spirit Plus inquiry, and then Kamloops and the disclosures of the residential school graves over the past few years, I think has just increased awareness so much.
Yeah. It's very unfortunate, but I'm really glad that things like that have come out recently, even though it's a hard topic for some people, but it's brought a lot of awareness.
It has, and I think it's forced because it's so emotional, especially for people who may not have thought about these issues before to learn about it. They have an emotional reaction often. And I think that once you have that emotional reaction, it makes you stop to think, what was going on? Why did this happen? And then eventually that leads you to, what can we do now? How can we help make Canada a better place? You know, if we love Canada today, how can we make it even better tomorrow? And so I think that that's one thing that's definitely changed, is the level of awareness. And then the response, like I'm saying, what do we do now is the question a lot of people are asking. And so there's been a bunch of responses for people. I think educators, the education system has definitely responded in a major way. You're starting to see the business world and other aspects of our society respond also. And I would say, like, even something that's maybe not the biggest, but that all of us are more familiar with now is another example of how society is responding, which is to say land acknowledgements. So you often hear we're here on Treaty 1 and the homeland of the Métis Nation, and then you hear an acknowledgement of the 7 Indigenous nations in Manitoba. And that's becoming more and more common. And sometimes people like ask about that. What is it? Is that the next step in reconciliation? It's a conversation starter for sure. But what I would say is one thing we can all agree on probably is that it's a sign of showing respect. It's showing respect for Indigenous nations. And so after we moved to Winnipeg from the reserve, and I was, playing hockey and going to school in the city here way back in the last millennium, we didn't necessarily have that same kind of public showing of Indigenous culture and awareness. But today, when you go to a Jets game and they do the land acknowledgement at the start, or you're at a school event and they do the land acknowledgement at the start of the day, I do think that that's a sign of progress, that there is that visible public showing of respect for Indigenous peoples. And I think that that's a positive thing.
Building off of like us talking about TRC and the progress and the awareness and stuff like that, and you were saying that a lot of people are asking the same question, like, what do we do now? So building off of that, when we talk about the 94 calls to action, so it took 7 years to complete 13. I think it's now 14 as of recently, which means that there's less than 2 calls a year. So being at this pace that we are at right now, if I do the math, it would take about 43 and a half years to implement the remaining 81. Building off of that, do you think we are able to, and if so, how do we hold the elected officials accountable? And how can we as youth take our own action or bring awareness to these topics?
Well, I would say vote. The ballot box is the number one way to hold elected officials accountable. And whether it's this issue or a healthcare issue or an education issue, if you're not happy with the way things are going, then you should vote. And you should use your vote to signal that you want a change in direction by voting for somebody else than who's in power right now. And I really encourage young people to vote. And so as high school students, there's going to be a lot of grade 12s who are able to vote this year and in the next federal election and then in the next municipal election after that. So what I would say is I've voted in every election since I was 18. I voted for the federal, provincial, civic. I've even voted off reserve for chief and council elections every time since I turned 18. And I would encourage you to do so too. I think it's very important to have your say and to have your voice. And then in between elections, you can also be active. If you write a letter, an email, make a phone call to your elected official, it does have an impact on the way that they think. And an email is one step. If you send a physical letter, it might get noticed to a different degree. And if you physically, or not physically, but if you directly call and speak to somebody on the phone or speak to somebody at an in-person event, then I think that that can have a different level of an impact on that person's thinking. So I would just encourage you to make yourself visible and heard and use your voice. And, you know, obviously to do so respectfully, but to do it in a way that represents who you are and what you think. And I think that as long as you do that, you may not feel like, for instance, the calls to action are being followed up on as quickly as you would like, but at least you're helping to nudge things into the right direction.
I do have a question. So most teens aren't likely to vote due to them not knowing what time it is or when it's going to happen. Do you feel that social media is a positive way to alert and spread the news of it?
It can be. It can also be a source of misinformation. So I think it can go both ways. And so I think it's really important to have trusted sources online that are going to give you, right? Like, so make sure the people that you're following actually have legit info. And then I think that that would be a good thing to be able to access. But I mean, I can tell you right now, voting day this year, unless the government calls an early election, is going to be October 3rd. Okay. So make sure you circle October 3rd. Put a reminder. Put a reminder in your phone. It'll be 8 to 8 most likely in terms of the time of day. And then also there'll be an advanced voting period too. So this is good for young people to keep in mind too. There's typically about 10 days of advanced voting in most elections these days. And that's good, like if you have to work or if you have to go to school and you think like, oh, October 3rd, I might not be able to make it down in person. So you can make a plan to vote in advance. The one thing I would say, the other piece to keep in mind is about IDs. And this is something that affects young people too, because for sure, I know a lot of young people are excited to go get their license or to go get their ID and be able to, you know, do all the stuff that happens once you're of age. And obviously I'm talking about voting first and foremost, but also other young people haven't necessarily had the opportunity to get their ID yet. So again, if you care about healthcare, education, climate change, the justice system, the CFS system, the state of our roads and highways, meaning potholes, all these issues are controlled by the provincial government. Colleges, universities, post-secondaries, the K-12 system, childcare, this is all provincial. So you could have your say if you want to change, if you want things to get better. And so maybe do a little bit of planning, make sure that you order your IDs in advance. And then that way, by the time the election comes around, you're all good. And then spend a little bit of time figuring out who the local candidates are in your area and which team they're on and which is the one that you want to support.
So when we talk about voting, we've been through the fact that you need to be 18.
Yep.
And considering that I'm 18, I can vote. So
right on.
What would you say to an 18-year-old Indigenous voter who is unsure of who or what to vote for?
I would say that it's time for us to have a provincial government that you can be proud of again. And I think a lot of people have been disappointed with what they've seen from our current PC government over the past few years. But our team is very strong. As a Manitoba NDP, we've got people from all walks of life that really represent the province. And we've got a really strong plan to fix healthcare, to be able to ensure that education is getting the proper investments, but that we're also taking action on the issues that affect people day to day in terms of the cost of living and, you know, potholes in the streets and being able to just have a better quality of life here in Manitoba. So I think that our team is the one that would appeal to a young person who is looking forward to the future here in Manitoba and is trying to improve things because we're invested in this place as much as everyone else. And I think we have a team that's got our ear to the ground a bit more and represents all walks of life in Manitoba.
Okay, so vote for you.
Yep, 100%. Okay. That's why I'm doing this. Yeah.
So talking about helping the Indigenous communities, recently some of our teachers did a data analysis that demonstrated a disparity between Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth with success rates in English and math grades.
Okay.
So a small percentage received above 60% compared to non-Indigenous youth, which range between 80 to 100%. So my question for that would be, what do you think schools, along with ours, can do to support or Indigenous youth and help improve these outcomes?
I think it's a really important question, both for Indigenous students, but also because it's relevant to the improvements we want to make to education for students from all walks of life. And I think the thing that we have to do is, one, we got to listen to the teachers and the educators who have the expertise in education. And I think we also got to listen to the students and what their needs are, right?
Yeah.
So I'll start with maybe the first part and then talk about the students after that. What I've heard from educators time and time again is that if we want to help students succeed better in the classroom, we have to address the barriers that they face even before they get to school.
Yeah.
And so for some students, it's access to food and nutrition. Maybe they're not getting that at home, or maybe there's some disruptions happening at home life. But if we can put out the food at school and ensure that everyone's able to focus and not be hungry, I think that that's really important. For other students, it's mental health supports. And maybe students are dealing with an undiagnosed mental health issue, or they have been diagnosed, but they're not getting the inclusion supports that they need in order to succeed. So making sure that those things are there. And in other cases, we need like tailored supports that are going to help that specific individual's learning style so that they can succeed in the classroom. But again, I think educators do a pretty heroic job in terms of our schools and when students are in the actual school. And some of where the attention needs to be now is helping with the barriers that young people face, whether it's home life, peer issues, stress stuff, mental health issues, impacts of poverty, issues with family, etc. A government can't do everything, but a government should be able to do some things to help young people be able to show up at school and just for a little few hours a day be able to minimize the stress and focus on learning and focus on the future a little bit. So I think that that's one thing that we've heard loud and clear, and that's what we'd like to focus on. Province-wide nutrition program for schools and increased mental health supports and things like that, just so that the young person who is making the effort to show up can succeed and get the supports that they need. And then I'd like to spend some time listening to the young people and asking them, like, what are the issues here? Is it some of the social or personal challenges, mental health issues that I was just outlining? Sometimes folks flag, like, maybe if we can have efforts to make culture and identity be more included in the educational environment, then that's going to help young people succeed as well. And so I think that we can start these initiatives, and then along the way, we should check in with the students and ask, like, hey, how's it going? Is this working? Is this helping you to feel supported? Are you feeling like this is an adequate or the right fit for you? Or if not, how can we change this a little bit? So I think that there's a lot of good that's happening in our school system today, and we just need to make sure that the resources are there and that we're actually listening to the people who we're trying to support, which is the educators and the students and their families as well.
When a lot of people, when they talk about the Indigenous peoples and the Indigenous communities, there's a lot of stereotypes. And when you speak with people who are non-Indigenous and you ask them their opinions, there's like a certain like type of stigma that was made around our Indigenous community. And how do you think that you can help that stigma that was made around Indigenous peoples?
Well, I think that it's a really big question, and we should understand that often stigma or stereotypes or even racism, when it's more overt or systemic, often those things have a political purpose, right? Those things were introduced to try and justify something else that was going on in the society. And so I think we should be very open-minded and clear-eyed about it and just call those things out and say, you know what, that's not really right. I think this is a more accurate way to go. And the truth of the matter is this: talent is distributed evenly across our whole society, right? And so you can go into the Indigenous community and find great athletes, great intellectuals, people who are going to succeed in business, people who are going to succeed in medicine or art or music, right? And so I think if we can kind of celebrate some of those examples too, that can help defeat some of the stereotypes that are out there in our society. And then just myself as an individual, I always try to like share the positive and share like, here's something from Indigenous culture that made a contribution that all of us benefit from. And I think that that's very easy to do in this part of the world because we live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And this is an example that I always share, and I think I shared it at an assembly here a few years ago. We live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. So you're a Winnipegger, you're a Manitoban, you're a Canadian. What do those words mean? Like literally, what do they mean?
Ooh, I feel like
putting you on the spot here. Yeah. Well, I'll help you out. Winnipeg means muddy river or dirty river in Ojibwe.
Yeah.
Manitoba Bay means the spirit is here, also in Ojibwe. Canada means like a town or a village, a settlement in the Huron language. So you, whether you're Indigenous or not, right? And I'm just talking to the listener now, whether you're Indigenous or not, if you identify as a Winnipegger, some part of your identity was shaped by Indigenous culture. If you identify as a Manitoban, some part of your identity was shaped by Indigenous culture. If you identify as a Canadian, some part of your identity was shaped by Indigenous culture. And so I think if we can kind of like expand that awareness among people and people understand like, you know what, I'm a non-Indigenous person, but Indigenous cultures have really influenced who I am today, then I feel like that's also maybe the most effective thing that we can do in terms of a positive approach to combating some of the stigmas and stereotypes. Because the truth is, like in this part of the world, Indigenous cultures have absolutely helped, along with many other cultures, have absolutely helped us to enjoy the quality of life that we have today. And so if we can just kind of help remind and educate and increase the awareness, and I think in the long run, that's probably the most effective way that we can help achieve what you're wanting there.
Term really blew my mind.
Yeah,
Oh, whoa.
Amazing viewpoint. Yeah, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
A lot of Indigenous teens that are in the child welfare system are often left to fend for themselves after aging out of the care and leading to drug abuse, homelessness, or worse. If given an opportunity, what is change you would like to see in this topic?
Well, I think that there's a ton that we want to do in this area. And I think the vast majority of Manitobans want to see things get better in this area too. Just specifically with CFS on the thing that you're talking about, I think extensions in care, extensions in the age of care are like one step that's part of it. Because you look at the average family out there, more kids today continue to live at home past their 18th birthday.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? While they're going to university or college, or they're starting their working life, saving up for their first home. Most people stay at home like into their 20s, right? So why, for a young person who's our collective responsibility as a quote unquote ward of the state, why would we have this 18-year-old cutoff? Why wouldn't we support them, since our overall society seems to be saying young people need more support going into their early 20s as well? So I think that that's one thing. And that's something that we really worked. I used to work at the University of Winnipeg before politics. And that's one thing that we did there. We started a tuition waiver kids in care program, it was called. And basically it meant that if you found your way to the University of Winnipeg from the CFS system, we would pay your tuition and your books, and we would find a way to help out with your cost of living as well. And I think that the other post-secondaries now do that too, meaning the other universities and colleges. So I think that that's a really clear example of how we can use education, which can be a force for positive change in anyone's life, to help even the playing field for some young people who've been facing more barriers at the start of their life. And then specifically with the issue of people without shelter or homelessness, because unfortunately we know that a huge amount of the people who end up on the streets in Winnipeg and across Manitoba have come out of the child welfare system. I think that we would really like to use what's called a continuum of care model, which is kind of like housing first plus supports so that you can succeed in housing when you get there. And basically, if we were to win the election and form the next government, what we would do is bring all the different groups together that work in this area, all the different not-for-profits, even the business leaders who are active in this area, the foot patrols like Downtown Community Safety Patrol, Mama Bear Clan, etc. Bring all those groups together, Bear Clan, and just say, all right, let's make a list of all the housing units we have. Now let's make a list of all the outreach workers we have. And now let's go tent to tent, camp to camp, and talk person to person and say, you know what, we've got a place for you to stay. And would you like to come with us? We'll get you set up with your own place now. And then when they get into the place, we say, now we'd like to help you with your healthcare needs, mental health needs. Maybe there's addictions issues. Maybe some folks are even ready to talk about training and employment and jobs and stuff like that. So it's kind of a continuum of care, which is a healthcare term, meaning you meet people where they're at, and then you try to put them on a path towards getting the various needs that they have addressed. And some jurisdictions have tried this across North America and seen really good results. And I think here in Manitoba, it could really, really help us. And I think whether you're somebody who's directly affected by this, or you see this in your area or not, I do think Manitobans from all walks of life want to see some positive change here, because everyone sees it these days, whether it's with camps or bus shacks or all these different issues. And so it's time for a new approach, and I think that this is one that could really help us.
So when we talk about positive change, now I want to get into obviously this is like all positive, but I want to know, because you have involvement in powwows.
Yep.
Do you dance?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah.
Do you have a video?
Yeah. Yeah.
When we're talking about powwows and stuff, we've attended Sundance.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
It's really
It's a really good experience.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah.
Would you encourage Indigenous children and youth that are struggling? Would you encourage them to attend Sundance and powwows? Like, do you think that that would help them in any positive way, or encourage them to
Like connect with their culture?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I would absolutely encourage, and I would say it's inclusive to everybody. So even if you're non-Indigenous and you want to check it out, by all means. And also, I would also say, even if you practice a different faith tradition, come. There's nothing, we're never asking anyone to give up who they are in order to participate in our thing. And the powwow in particular is not really like a religious thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a social thing. It's a celebration. It's a party. Like, that's how we get together and have fun, right? Like when I was a kid, Northwestern Ontario, that's where we got to meet the kids from the other reserve. That's where we got to run around and play in the dirt, was at the powwow. And then when we got older, that's where we got to meet the, other teenagers that we wanted to talk to, right? It was at the powwow. And even as adult, like that's where we go to visit and catch up and gossip and tell jokes and stuff like that. And it happens around the drum, it happens around the dance arbor. And really, while there are spiritual elements there, like you will hear an elder pray at the start of the grand entry, you will see sacred items like the drums, the pipes, the eagle staffs, and things like that there. It's not so much a spiritual or religious ceremony as it is a social, cultural celebration. So by all means, open door, anyone should absolutely participate. But when you're talking about the Sundance is a religious or spiritual ceremony. But even there, the door is open to people from all walks of life. I remember growing up around the Sundance when I was a little kid, and not only did we see Christian people and Jewish people and Muslim people there praying with us, but we had Buddhist monks come from Japan. We had people from all over Asia and Africa, South America join us at different points of my childhood. And never did we ask those people to stop being who they were or to stop praying in the way that they did. And in fact, one time, towards the end of my father's life, he actually brought the Archbishop of Winnipeg there, which was a very significant moment for him as a residential school survivor who went to a Catholic residential school when he was a child. And the Archbishop took off the Roman collar, took off the black robe, and he put on a Sundance skirt. And he wore a beaded medallion around his neck, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he had no shirt, just like the rest of us. And he danced in the middle of the arbor.
Huh.
So I think that it's a very inclusive environment, for one thing. So if it's something that speaks to you or you have a curiosity about it, by all means, come and check it out, because there's something powerful there and something positive there that really has helped a lot of people over the years. And then just to bring it back to the topic of reconciliation, like what I saw there, when I saw the Archbishop in the Sundancers' clothing with the rest of the Sundancers, often the reconciliation conversation is political. But on that day, for those of us who were there, you could see there was something more than just politics. It was a personal or emotional or a spiritual thing, however you want to describe it. And at the end of the day, it was just a reminder that we're all just people, right? We all have something in common. So I think that that's a really positive thing if you're able to experience it.
It's very beautiful.
Yeah, truth and reconciliation should definitely be more than just politics. And I think most people just kind of see it as that, like the government and the people. And honestly, it's more than just that. It's a lot of just in yourself, in your heart, in your head, like how you're feeling about it. And yeah, we're all just people.
100%.
Yeah, it's like if you want to go to Sundance, it's an amazing thing to experience. It's a really good connection to the earth and creator, and like that really strong connection is amazing to experience.
Yeah, it's a highlight of my year.
Yeah, I love it. I can't wait for the summer.
So just out of curiosity, when we talk about Sundance and that, and I kind of want to get more into the spiritual side of things now, do you have like a spiritual like name or like your colors?
Yeah, that's all I have.
Can I know what it is?
Yeah, Wab is a nickname, which is short for Wabonaquit, which is the name that I was given at birth. So when I say that's all I have, that means like people often ask me what's your English name?
Mm-hmm.
I just have an Anishinaabe name, right? So now we use the language and terminology of spirit name, because often people have a name at birth and then they have an Anishinaabe or Dakota or Cree name that they're given in a ceremony along with colors and things like that. But in traditional times, you would be given your name at birth. right?
Yeah.
And then later on in life, you might get a second name or a third name. For instance, like let's say there was a healing ceremony, you got sick, healing ceremony, they might give you a name as part of your healing journey. Or maybe a big thing happens. You're a veteran, you serve in the war with distinction, you come home, they give you a name to honor your acts of valor. Or maybe you get married, and as part of the marriage ceremony, they give you a new name, like just because you're entering a new phase in your life. So an individual might collect multiple names over the course of their life, right?
I think we should really bring that back.
Yeah, no, like, yeah, that was very important to my parents, obviously. And then they tried to get after me to do the same thing too. So all of our kids have Anishinaabe names, as well as some of them have English names as well too.
Do you have a spirit name, Havana?
I don't know it in Ojibwe, but it currently right now it's Little Brown Bird. But I know that as I'm growing up, it's gonna change, and I might get a second name or a third one.
Wazawazi Beneshis.
Thank you, thank you. I really want to learn my cultural language. I think it's a really good connection, and like talking to people in my own language, I feel like I'd feel a lot better within myself.
Yeah, I think language is very, very important. And so I really encourage you to do that. And I encourage everyone to seek out a spiritual name, study the language a little bit if you think it's going to help you. Because like I said, Anishinaabe Moen, our language, it was the lingua franca of Canada for like more than 100 years. It was a trade language. And to this day, like I said, again, it named our province, it named our city, and travel around the province, you'll see tons of other Anishinaabe or Cree or Dakota names. And so I think that can help you understand, whether you're Indigenous or not, again, can help you understand our history and our shared understanding. And then for the Anishinaabe or Dakota or Cree community or Métis or Anishinaabe or Inuit or Dene, I think it can really help form the bonds if people learn the language. And to me, it's good because I believe in freedom of religion. So I don't want to force people to believe in a certain spirituality. But even if you're Christian or traditional or atheist, we can still have a shared cultural identity with the language, among other things too. Not exclusively the language. I don't want to make it that. But yeah, I just think it's really good to learn.
So is there anything in the Anishinaabe language that you want to teach us?
Well, you probably know like Buju and Miigwech,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And Anin is kind of like what's up. So maybe a good thing to learn would be Nimi.
Nimi.
Nimi means he or she dances. That's another cool feature of our language, is that it's gender neutral, right? So he dances, she dances. It's the same word, Nimi. And then that's a good foundation, because then you can learn like how to talk about powwow or Sundance or some of the other things we've been talking about there. So yeah, so Nimi is a pretty simple word, easy to learn, and has lots of applications.
Nimi, I like that one. Is there any questions that you want to ask us?
Yeah, sure. How's the football team at Elmwood? No, I was kidding. No, it's, I have some... Yeah, exactly. I'm a Calvin supporter, as you may have heard. I don't know. I think you have a pretty good school community, a very active school community, I can say more specifically. So how have you found that that's impacted your learning here and your time as students?
I wish that more things and more supports and programs about indigenous culture would have come around when I was younger, like more in 9th grade instead of 12th, because as I'm graduating, I'm finding that more stuff is coming out, and I wish I had that. But I'm happy for the future generations to have that.
Yeah. And maybe you can help give back in the future as a graduate, eh?
That's what I plan to do. I plan to take my career and give back to my community.
That's great.
Yeah, we have, like we were speaking of earlier, we have our Indigenous Studies class, but that just became a thing, I think it was like last year. And we weren't able to take it because we were in grade 11, and it's for grade 12.
It's a requirement of grade 12.
Oh, okay.
So building off of what she said, I as well wish that was something that we had an opportunity to take way before. And I think that like when we like talk about the Indigenous peoples and the history and stuff, I'm grateful that we are given at least one opportunity to attend a class like that, to have a chance to learn more than what you were just told when like beforehand. Because I feel when a lot of schools or certain educators teach about Indigenous peoples, the main thing that they teach is like the residential schools,
right,
and the negative side of the history and stuff. But I'm grateful that we have a class like that where we can speak
can
more
really
about the
deep
positive.
dive into the issues and the community.
And it's not just all revolved around, the negative side of things, but also positive outcomes and more things that we can learn. And it helps us want to advocate for change. And I think it's a good thing, yeah.
And what would you say, because I think that's really important, like the positive side. So what would you say to a non-Indigenous student at Elmwood to get them to take that course?
I would say that I feel that there are a lot of non-Indigenous youth who are interested. And I think that with Indigenous culture, it's an open door, like you said. It's welcome for anybody. And I think that it's a good thing for non-Indigenous people to learn more about the culture. And because I feel when we're talking about like stereotypes, there's a lot stigmas and stuff like that, and racism. A lot of that is what people think of when you speak about Indigenous peoples. And I think that if non-Indigenous youth, especially because it's good to start early on, I think that if they take classes like that and they gain that knowledge, that can help lower the case of stereotypes that are given to our communities. And I think if you want to learn something, go ahead. I feel like a lot of non-Indigenous youth feel like learning about the culture is meant for people who come from it and are part of it. But like it's for everyone.
It's
and
definitely open to anyone.
I think it's good that our non-Indigenous youth learn more about it, because it's the roots of Canada, like you said. And I think it's very important to learn the history of where you come from. And it all started with Indigenous people. So I think it's very important.
Right on.
So if you're listening and you're not Indigenous, take Indigenous studies. Thank you. Leading up to our last questions, I actually want to ask about what advice can you give us youth to help advocate change for the future?
I think a really important thing is to do right by yourself, to pursue your own education and your own career and your own balance in your life in terms of how you want to live positively, like, mental health and all these different dynamics. I think that if you do that and you go out and succeed, and then you remember to give back along the way as you are finding success, then I think that that's going to be the best way to contribute, because whatever the waves of life, kind of direct you towards, whether, again, you're somebody who's going to succeed in academics or business or art or culture or music, dance, sports, what have you, if you go out and do your thing, and then along the way, you just remember to come back and share with the people who are coming up behind you, then you're going to help the next athlete, the next musical performer, the next business person, the next intellectual. And I think that that's how we do it. Each of us pursue our own thing in a positive way, of course, not just pursue anything, but pursue something positive, and then give back to the people who are coming up behind us. And then I think that just helps the overall conversation and the overall society move forward in a good way. And yeah, especially if the cultural stuff speaks to you, whether it's powwow or ceremonies or language, then for sure make time in your life for those things as you go to school and as you work and as you make a career for yourselves. But yeah, I would just say pursue the positive things in your life, and then remember to give back along the way.
So our whole idea with this podcast, for those listening, whether that be Indigenous or non-Indigenous youth, especially, that them hearing people like us talking about these specific topics that maybe they aren't comfortable talking about, that we hope to inspire the ones that are listening and inspire them to feel comfortable and want to speak up, especially since like we're youth, so 17 and 18, and we're feeling comfortable enough to speak on these issues and speak about change. So we hope that the ones who don't feel as comfortable doing that hear us and they're like, oh, we should do something like that too.
Hopefully we can help lots of people.
So leading off of that, when we say that, so what would you like to see out of something like this?
Well, what I'm hearing you say is like confidence. Is
Yeah.
that you're finding confidence to be able to speak about stuff that's important to you. And I think that that's really important for young people of all walks of life, is to find some sort of confidence that's going to allow you to be able to make your life what you want it to be. And so if engaging with Indigenous issues and advocating for Indigenous reconciliation is something that allows you to feel like you're solid, so that you can speak with confidence and speak with some strength, I think that's really important. And I would also encourage, like, if math is your thing where you feel rock solid and that's what gives you confidence, or basketball, or, whatever it is, find that confidence in the area that appeals to you, and then let that kind of become something that you can embody in all aspects of your life, because we want to stay humble enough to be motivated to succeed, but we have to have enough confidence to be able to go out into the world and do the things that are going to be beneficial to us. And so I think for a young person, and reflecting again way back into the last millennium when I was a young person, I do think that trying to find confidence and the ability just to kind of, do something in a good way was one of the more important things that I had to learn along the way. And so it's not always easy. Sometimes it can be really intimidating or even scary to speak in front of other people or to speak in a broadcast medium like this one. But I would just encourage you to do so. A lot of the good things in life are a little bit nerve-wracking or intimidating. And as long as you're doing it for a good reason and you're doing it in a good way, then I encourage you to find that source of confidence.
Well, I hope that not only our podcast, but your voice and the things that you've given us and your opinions today help inspire anyone who's listening. And we just want to thank you for coming.
Yeah, great job.
Yeah,
You're both naturals at this, so well done.
Well, so are you. But you've had practice.
I have a bit of practice, yeah.
Awesome.